I appreciate everybody being here. And I just want to say this as I prepared. I'm so pleased. I mean, I've known Martha now from Atlanta Writers Club, the Decatur Book Festival. Her and Jesse, we're looking forward to breaking some bread with. And Mulligan, I have seen your emails, and you and I have been friends online for a long, long time. And I'm really looking forward to my wife and I coming up and visiting Sugar Hill, Georgia.
We would love it.
We're going to get Miss Martha Boone on stage. All right. Again, I'm so, first of all, I have to say this, out of being officially transparent. Number one is I've not only read her book once, I've now read her book twice. Now that I've done it, almost read it twice. I'm still like 3 readings left with friends at Monarch House. I'm reading The Big Free to the senior book club that's at the Monarch House residence in Newnan. It's been a weekly fun read for them. Although I got a little red-faced and embarrassed on a couple of the scenes, and Martha knows exactly what I'm talking about. I haven't said some of those words probably that many times in my entire lifetime, but that's okay. It's not that they were bad words. It just brings up humorous, blushing commentary. A doctor just jokes and laughs it off, but a normal human being goes, wait a minute. And I'll leave it there. She can explain that, fill it in later. But an intern at a hospital obviously has to be exposed to a lot of different awkward situations that we might find uncomfortable. But I've known Martha now for, was it 3 years ago? We met at the Decatur Book Festival, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, at the Decatur Book Festival, because your book had just come out. You and I shared the same year for a book release. But Martha she's finally retired. She actually has this bright smile, the color's back in her face. She's sleeping in now for the first time in 30-something years. And it's hard to think that you've been doing this. We're a surgeon for 30-something years.
35.
35. Well, I was trying to hedge a little bit for you. The Big Free is her first novel, but it's a fantastic first novel. Once you start on it, you won't stop. I promise you. She did her surgical and urological training in New Orleans at Tulane, and worked 6 years at Charity Hospital, which was the source of inspiration for The Big Free. She is one of the first 100 women in the world trained in urology. She writes the humor and horror of the world of medicine as only a true insider can write. And when you read her book, you'll know exactly what she just meant by that. She lives in Atlanta, as we now know, in the Roswell area, with her husband, Jesse, and 2 stepdaughters. Their family likes to sail, travel, and cook, which they've done an awful lot of in the last month since she retired. She is now retired. You have no plans of going back. You're not going to sneak back in the back door or anything, right? You're going to write now?
Actually, I'm taking a sabbatical. I'm really just off for a year, but everybody keeps tired, so maybe I am. I don't know.
You could start writing your next book and you'll be world famous. All right. The Big Free as a book is Charity Hospital, and it's 1982 in New Orleans. And Charity is a big medical free-for-all. And Martha, I don't remember if I told you this, but Connie and I lived in New Orleans for about a year when I was doing seminary in New Orleans. So this was fun read, trust me. Elizabeth is one of the first women in the toughest surgery department in America. With her pearls and her pink plaid socks, she doesn't fit in at first. Half the doctors who start the surgery program never finish either. Nothing in her proper Southern upbringing prepares Elizabeth for the violence, debauchery, and intensity of inner city trauma surgery. The Big Free is filled with unforgettable characters. Yes, that's true. Living the best and the worst New Orleans has to offer. Her reviews, I'm not even going to begin to read. I'm going to let her hype up her own book because it is captivating and it will just be an amazing television program potential. I could see it all over the place. So you just got to get it into the right hands. That's all we got to do, Martha. Martha and her husband Jesse just got back, like we talked about, from a well-deserved. You calling it a sabbatical? I'm going to say that you're getting ready to retire and do something else. So with that, Miss Martha, as our ritual is, we start out with 3 basic questions. Tell us who you are, a little bit more about you, your writing journey, and then tell us about getting the Big Free published and what that meant to you.
So first of all, I'd like to thank you and Connie for everything that you do to support other authors. It's just amazing, and I'm very appreciative of everything that you've done for me. So thanks, both you and Connie. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in South Carolina. Half of my family were farmers and the other half were teachers. So I got a good background in working the land. And as long as I can remember, I love to read. I started writing when I was around 6 or 7, and I've written my whole life just to kind of help me process my emotions. Whenever anything really good or really bad would happen, I would write a story about it. And if any of you have ever seen Isabel Allende talk, she talks about being a great liar. She talks about starting out as a writer, and her boss said, you know, Isabel, you're lying all the time. This is the news. You can't be doing this. And so I've always kind of been a pretty good liar too. Anything that happens, I want to take it and spin it and say something else. And my husband, who's a very concrete accountant type guy, when we first started dating, he thought I was just a pathological liar. And he finally realized I didn't lie about anything that was important. But if something happened, I would try to embellish the story. By the time I told it to 2 or 3 people, I had new characters and a couple of plot lines. And so I think of everything as a story. And also, for better or worse, I see everything in life as funny. Even the most tragic things that occur, I see a funny spin to it. And being a doctor is basically all day long listening to people's stories. You see very common, average people demonstrate greatness when they go through complex health problems. People at their worst, when they're frightened, and you see people do amazing things. Some of the caregivers are just amazing. So stories to be able to write come out of the work. I mean, it's natural to just hear complex things that happen to people every day, all day long. I was telling Anne when we first started that I've written about 7 books, but I've only published the 1 because I'm very about the editing. When I wrote The Big Free, I was getting up every morning at 4:30 in the morning and writing for 60 to 90 minutes. And I didn't care about how I felt or whether I wanted to do it or not. I just approached it like I did surgery, which was with time management and discipline, and just kind of made myself do it. And I was being prompted by one of the people that taught me at Tulane was a famous trauma surgeon named Norman McSwain, and he's the only character in the book who's really himself. But if you want to read about an amazing man, just look up the obituary of Norman McSwain, and you'll see someone who really did a lot of amazing things. The Secretary of the Navy gave his obituary at his funeral because he had spent most of his life teaching our Navy SEALs and our military people all over the world how to care for themselves so that they wouldn't die in the field. But anyway, he was one of my bosses at Tulane. And after Katrina destroyed Charity Hospital, he started calling me and writing me on a regular basis and telling me to please turn my stories into a book. I would write a story about something that happened at Charity and mail it to him. And over 20 years, he had a stack about 12 inches tall of all the stories that I had sent to him. And I didn't realize he had kept them. And when Katrina ruined Charity, he just started harassing me, basically. And even though I was in my 50s at the time, I was still very much his student. And so when your boss, former teacher, calls you and tells you to do something, it can create an enormous amount of anxiety. So he started giving me deadlines. You need to have it ready by here, have it ready by there. And so that's the main impetus for turning my stories into a book. Unfortunately, Dr. McSwain died about 2 weeks before the book came out, which was a big shock. But he, is featured in the book. He is himself, and he read the parts that include him, and he wanted, to be in them. My writing journey has been pretty much writing about all kinds of things. I just write about whatever happens. I'll write about a funeral. I'll write about a death. I'll write about a birth. I'll write about something that happens in the supermarket. The publishing process was kind of interesting. Once I started talking about the book, it started to come into fruition. I found a really great editor that I got back page after page with red marks all over it, which nearly made me cry because I was always the best student in the class, and all of a sudden I was a big dummy. So that was a big shock. But I learned to love trying to make it better after a while. It took me a minute. At first, there was a lot of crying and thrashing about, and my husband, the accountant, comes in and he goes, "Well, didn't you want someone to make the book better? Isn't that what you're paying her for?" He doesn't understand. But anyway, so the publishing process, I started putting the word out there that I was writing this book, and I knew absolutely nothing. I had been in a writer's club for a couple of years and really learning a little bit about the business, but I really did not know what I was in for. And at this time, Amazon was really taking over publishing, and some of the small publishing companies were actually looking for authors. So I talked to 3 or 4 of my patients who had published books, and they called small publishing houses that they knew, and actually 3 places called me. My husband had put a copy of the book. It wasn't the last draft, but I think it was like next to the last draft. He had sent it to the Library of Congress, copyrighted, and some people had actually located it through the Library of Congress and contacted me, which is certainly not a path that I've heard anyone else describe, but it was kind of one of those meant to be things. The book is about, loosely, it's a novel, and it's loosely written about my first 6 months at Charity Hospital. People who have read it have told me that it's a bit like MASH. There's a lot of horror with the inner city crack wars going on. Any given day, we would see 10 to 20 gunshot wounds, stab wounds. New Orleans, what a great place to put a world. I mean, the food, the music, the culture, the architecture, the zany people. I mean, there are some crazy types there. People who trained with me at Charity have told me that the things that I wrote about, they experienced all of them. And a lot of people who trained at Grady have experienced the same kinds of problems with patients and nurses and residents. So they're not just my stories. I think they're kind of stories of most nurses and most doctors who've worked in an urban center. I had several themes in the book that I was interested to get across, and Mike can tell me if he felt this was effective or not. I feel like the unsung heroes of medicine are the nurses. Everybody gives the doctor credit. If something goes wrong, they blame the doctor, but the people who really run the hospital are the nurses. If you have a good hospital, it's because you have good nurses. So I was trying in the book to show how much the nurses are often the patient advocate, and they're the ones who are there when the doctor's not there. I also wanted to show a little bit of the relationship between the doctors and the nurses, which is often supportive, but sometimes adversarial and at times comical. That's pretty much. Does that answer your questions?
Well, you're doing good that way, sure. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you this way about it is, like I said, I've got an unfair advantage because I know the stories so well now. Was Nurse Robichaud based on anybody that you knew?
So Head was based on kind of a summary of all the good nurses that I've known. She was not any one person. Dr. McSwain was the only one who was one person.
Right. And you did not have a Dr. Caballero, flirting around with you, taking you to dinner at Commander's Palace, right?
There were a few guys in line for that, but that scene actually occurred between myself and my mother.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The book came out.
I won't give it away, but it is Commander's Palace is phenomenal. I mean, my wife and I've been there years ago, and I'm visualizing what happened, while I'm reading that. Again, I'm not going to give it away. You got to read the story to enjoy the embarrassment that could happen to somebody that is totally exhausted.
There were so many fun things that happened around going around and doing talks on the book. The Faulkner Society in New Orleans invited me to speak at the Presbytery, which is a beautiful old building in the French Quarter. And it happened to be the 300th anniversary of the founding of New Orleans. And so I was on the program with the mayor of New Orleans and several people who had written, 5 to 7 books. And quite frankly, I'm sure mine was on there because there was a lot of sympathy towards reopening charity. And also, I think just it was a story that had come out that was about New Orleans. And I certainly was not, I don't think I was deserving of being there, considering that the other people had won all kinds of awards and written. One of them was the mayor, for God's sake. But they ended up having a small riot in the middle of the book talk. So we got a lot of publicity, and a bunch of people bought my book because of the riot that went on, because people were arguing about whether to take down the statues or not in New Orleans. So that was pretty crazy. But going around, I got to speak at the Louisiana Book Festival also because it was the 300th year. And some of the gentlemen that were in my book as characters actually came to the book signing. And several stood up and said that the stories were true, and that the part I didn't tell was that I had gotten them just as well as they had gotten me. So that was kind of fun. And interestingly enough, the guy in the book, the bad guy, he thinks he's the good guy. And the guy who in real life is the good guy thinks he's the bad guy. So nobody really knows exactly who they are. And they're all pointing their fingers at each other or imagining which doctor is which doctor.
So where is this poster of the gorilla? Do you have that in your bedroom with Jesse taking a look at that, or what?
So
Again, you have to read the story to understand the significance of.
So do I have time to tell one little funny story that's not in the book?
You're fine. Go ahead.
So we have time?
Yes.
So one thing that people ask me at every book signing is about what it was like to be the only woman. And everybody assumes that there was a lot of discrimination, and that really was not the case. On a farm, and so I pretty much was rough and tumble with the guys and really gave out as good as I got. But the 2 boys that I had to share a call room with, and you got to know, this is the 80s. I mean, it would never be this way now. But we slept in the same room and shared the same bathroom, these 2 guys and myself. And we were there like 100 hours a week, practically. So one fateful day, I get paged to go to, and we had these giant beepers that were like the size of a speaker at a drive-in movie. And so I go over there, and everybody thinks I'm in trouble. Oh my God, what has she done? So I'm there in front of this little short, fat, bald-headed gentleman who's the chairman of urology. I'm the first female he's ever taken, and he's nervous about all this. My pager goes off, and it says, "We're in the call room, and our pants are down." So it's these 2 paging me from the call room. And so the chairman is trying to act like nothing's going on. So he starts to try to talk to me about the Christmas party. Well, the Christmas party had always been a drunken debauchery, but he's trying to do something different because I'm the only girl and he's trying to fit me in. So he's trying to explain to me that they're going to have a dinner beforehand, and then, the boys will do what the boys will do. And he's trying to tell me that, they don't want to change things too quickly because it'll make me not well accepted. But he also recognizes that things need to change. And so this man is trying to figure out, thread the needle of having me be part of the team, but not do things that are inappropriate when they've got a girl on the team. So my pager goes off again, and it starts screaming, "We're in the call room, our pants are down." So the chairman's nervous, I'm nervous. I pull out my little day timer. I don't know if you guys remember these things, but it's a little calendar thing. Well, 2 condoms, foil-covered condoms, fly out of my day timer, and one of them sticks on the top of his little brown shoes. He looks me straight in the face with his Virginia accent, and he goes, "Honey, I'm glad you're enjoying Tulane." He turned around and went in his office. So I went back to the call room and gave them the business. But I ended up telling that story at his funeral. The chairman's wife invited me to speak at his funeral, and she insisted that I tell that story because that was his favorite story from his time as the chairman of urology. So that's it.
That fits the story in the book so well. You should have inserted it. It would have worked. It would have been interesting. So let me ask you this before I get others to ask questions. Is there a sequel to Elizabeth? Because obviously she has a career.
Yeah, it's 85% written. My husband thinks we're taking a sabbatical to travel. We're actually taking a sabbatical for me to write. And it's 85% written, and my editor says it sucks. So it might be a little while before we get it out.
There's no easy way to success. You know that. So, well, good. I'm glad to hear that, because Elizabeth is an interesting character, and I always joke when I see Martha that I keep saying Martha and Elizabeth are interchangeable in my head, because I know too much about your background now too. So it's a fascinating story, and I can only imagine what the sequel will be like, because she has to stay in residency at the Big Free. Is that right?
Yeah, when the book ends, she's only been there a year, and she's got 6 more to go.
Yeah, just 6. I mean, what the heck? That's at least 6 more novels. That's awesome. So at this point, I'm going to turn the focus to Miss Ann Mulligan, who's sitting patiently. However, you know what? Where's the floppy straw hat, Ann?
It's in my closet. I have a small head, and hats drop down. We had that hat propped and pinned, and everybody always wants to know where my hat is, but if I put it on, it would be down here.
Well, if you have, you have to see enough correspondence from Ann to know that is her trademark, and it fits her very, very well. And I know what was interesting in my first conversations with Ann was working her schedule around the fact that she is probably just as active in your acting side of things, in your theater side of things, up there at Sugar Hill.
Absolutely, I am. Yeah. It's in fact, the COVID-19 helped my writing. I wrote 2.5 books since we closed in March. I've written 2.5 books, complete books. Yeah. And I'm starting another one, which my publisher was thrilled to death with, but I had nothing else to do. Normally I am very, very busy in the theater. I don't act too often anymore. I direct and I produce, and I am the managing director and Ride Herd over a 200-member troupe. So it's quite a deal. But Sugar Hill's got a tremendous theater now, so we're excited.
Well, my wife and I are going to have to make that trip up there. That's for
absolutely.
Sure. Well, I know that, I was reading your profile and, so talking about wearing different hats. I mean, you've been a hairdresser, a legislative affairs director. Boy, do they need some help right now. You said it's a fancy name for a lobbyist. A drama director, playwright, humor columnist, and best-selling novelist, obviously. With lifetime experience providing a plethora of fodder for her Southern fried fiction. And, the different books that I've seen that you write, and then all of a sudden you come out with your latest one, and it is a shift for you into historical fiction. Because when I started doing my Shiloh series, I remember seeing your Chapel Hills, Jan Karen's Midford, and a couple others like that. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I can't compete with this. But I always have admired the ability for you to do what you do. And that's just amazing. You believe that coffee and chocolate are 2 of the 4 major food groups. You and my wife would get along great. Your passion is when it isn't writing the Southern fiction is community theater, which you've talked about. I'm just going to try to keep this somewhat simple. You got an award-winning literary site, The Right Conversation. So you help other writers. I know you do that all the time. I see you post on the American Christian Fiction Writers blogs all the time. And I'm one of those silent observers more than active in it. I get intimidated being one of one out of 100 males that are part of that program. I'm more comfortable at the Sisters in Crime in Atlanta than I am sometimes at the ACFW. Although I am active with the ACFW up in North Georgia, the group up there. But we already talked that Ann is up in Sugar Hill. Sugar Hill, where, for the folks that don't know, pinpoint Sugar Hill, because it's up towards between Athens
Right by
and Atlanta,
Buford.
right?
Oh yeah, it's right near Buford, Georgia. We're I always say I live at the bottom of the lake.
There you go.
We live at the southern tip of Lake Lanier. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And but obviously we know that you're a award-winning author, or at least I'm going to tell you we are. And and I started counting up your books, and I hope my math is pretty good here. But you either authored or co-authored 11 books.
That's right.
That's how many I counted.
That's what's out
those
now.
are the ones that are still active. But now here you are. You've written 2.5 books, and gosh, I could only dream that I could write that fast and do that well. I'm a plotter, not a plotter, a plotter.
I gotcha.
As part of your books, there is what's called the 4-book Chapel Springs series.
Mm-hmm.
And over the period from 2016 to 2017, you wrote Chapel Springs Revival, Chapel Springs Survival, Home to Chapel Spring, and Life in Chapel Springs. So by the time that you get done, you realize that everybody in the small town of Chapel Springs knows best friends Claire Bennett and Patsy Kowalski. It's impossible not to, what with Claire's zany antics and Patsy's self-appointed mission to keep her friend out of trouble. And trouble abounds. With a friend like Claire, you need a gurney, a mop, and a guardian angel. I love that combination. And I think that's why I love the term that you have, Southern fried fiction, and that's a fantastic. But you've also written When the Bow Breaks in 2017, and I'd say that is a timely novel about political intrigue and backroom deals.
Yeah.
You might want to stir that one back up. A Way Down, actually about as political as I'm going to get. Way Down Upon the Swanee Murder was in 2015. That was a novelette, ghost story.
A novelette, yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm always confused with the term between novelettes and novels and novellas and all that other stuff.
I know.
I write big books. I don't know about little ones. I don't even have a 5-minute conversation with myself. Ann's newest Southern Fried novel just came out. And I say Southern Fried novel because it's Southern Fried in that it is set in the South, but it is a historical fiction, and it's called In High Cotton. And you had the wonderful distinction to share my pain because yours came out in August, mine came out at the end of May. So we both experienced what COVID can do to book sales.
Yeah.
But I know you've got such a strong following. Yours just flew right off the bookshelves. For sure. The gist of the story that I know you're going to talk more about is while the rest of the world has been roaring through the 1920s, times are hardscrabble in rural South Georgia. Widow Maggie Parker is barely surviving raising her young son alone. Then as banks begin to fail, her father-in-law threatens to take her son and sell off her livelihood, the grocery store her husband had left her. Can 5 Southern women band together using their wisdom and wiles to stop him and survive the Great Depression? And then the wonderful opening line sets the tone. Southern women may look as delicate as flowers, but there's iron in their veins. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Iron Lady, Miss Ann Mulligan. Again, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your writing journey, because it could be a while, and then your featured book, and a little bit about Chapel Springs for sure.
Okay. Well, I was raised in Southern California, as Southern as I could get till I got here. I got here as quick as I could. I am Southern to my bottom of my toes. I love the South. I always have. When I started writing, I wrote plays first. I wrote little short things to illustrate my pastor's sermons. And I got those published immediately. The first one I ever sent, Lifeway picked up, and they published everything I'd send them. So when I turned to books, it was, Martha, quite an eye-opener. I knew nothing but how to write dialogue. POV, what's that? That's, omniscient. That's what God is, not, I knew absolutely nothing. So my journey was long. It took me 12 years. I needed the validation of a publisher buying my book from me. And I started before self-publishing or independent publishing was accepted. Anything before back then was vanity. So I kept working and kept working. It took 12 years until my first book was published. But I had some real funny things happen along the way. When the Bow Breaks went to Abingdon Press at the time and passed through all the different committees and all this stuff, they're ready to hand a contract and their slate's full for that quarter. They're going to put me off till September. That was fine with me. I'd finally done it. 2 weeks later, the editor retired and they wiped her hard drive clean. That was a hard drive that had my book on it. You begin to realize that somebody's saying not now. So I just kept writing. By the time Chapel Springs Revival came out, I had 3 other books, the other 3 books, two of the books written, and the last book in that series halfway written. So I didn't have a hard deadline. And then by the end of that time, when I had tried at one point to try something different. No one was buying. No one was interested in married love. No one was interested in taking it yet. And so I started in High Cotton. And then I laid it aside. My agent and I had a discussion and she said, do you want to write historical or contemporary? Well, I really liked the story, but I didn't want to get stuck in historical at the time. Interestingly enough, after 4 books, the Chapel Springs series was published. She said I had established my brand, and In High Cotton is absolutely my brand. It is an ensemble cast of strong Southern women who are facing life issues together. There is humor in it, even though it's a little different. It's not quite as madcap as Chapel Springs Revival, but there is humor in it. And that's why my books, I'm like Martha. I look at life through laugh-colored glasses. And so I feel it's very much the same. So this series has 4 books in it also. In High Cotton, On Sugar Hill will come out June of 2021. By the Sweet Gum will come out 9 months later. And the last one I'm starting to write, it's called Up Level Creek. So I'm excited about the series, real excited.
Wonderful. Where is the In High Cotton? It says South Georgia. Where do you have it based in?
Okay, I created, this is an interesting point too, and I'll tell another little story. I wanted to set it in Beaufort and Sugar Hill. The problem is Beaufort had the Bona Allen Tannery, and pretty much everybody was employed during the Great Depression. So that wouldn't work, not for the story I had planned. So I created a town called River's End. It's right down where the Ocmulgee, the Oconee rivers meet and become the Altamaha. Right. And the Indians used to call it River's End. So there came my town name right there. So it is a fictional town. Absolutely. So 2 books in this series will be in fictional towns, 2 books in real places.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. So I'm so tickled to death to see that this is coming out. So how has things been going for In High Cotton, being as you did, launch in August?
But it's been going well, not quite as wild as Chapel Springs Revival did, but people had been watching me for 12 years try to get published. And when that came out, we had a huge launch party on that one. And I think everybody's sales are down a little bit during this time.
Sure.
But it's doing all right. It's doing well. It's doing as well as I expected, and hope.
You've got a strong, you have a strong following, and that's for anybody that's watching that's got an author aspiration. Building that platform and the network really is important.
Oh, it is.
Kind of give you that spring, out there, obviously.
Yeah.
So, what has been your biggest challenge in your writing career?
For me, it's been, I'm becoming more of a seat of the pants writer than I ever was before. And it's really strange for me. Also really learning to divide my two passions and not let the theater overtake the writing. So I have to do, the morning part of my day is writing, and in the afternoon, if there's then at that in the evening is theater work, and that works out really well. I don't know. We all keep growing as writers. I've got some tremendous critique partners. We've been together for 15 years, and they don't let me get away with anything. They really push, and I love that. I've got an editor now that I absolutely adore. You need to have her on your hometown novel nights. She writes historical, Denise Weimer, and she is a really good editor and really pushes me to go further and further. And between my critique partners, that's something I've been working on really hard. So I think it's just continually growing as a writer to get all those things you want to get in.
I think that's an excellent point. And what advice would you share? You mentioned that you've got a critique group, and it's one of the things that motivations for us here at Hometown Novel Nights to create a writers group, so that we can give some inspiration, give some guidance, and thought-provoking, meeting information, but also to get those critique groups together, whether it's a big group or small group. What is your advice for a writers group in dealing with critique group situations?
The first thing you do is you leave your ego at the door.
Mm-hmm.
Grow that thick skin, because they're not critiquing you, they're critiquing the writing, and they want to make you better. All my critique partners and I met, we were all at the beginning of our journey. And so I happened to just gravitate to these gals who were serious. I was serious about it. And so anything that anybody told me that was right, it was good, I incorporated and I learned. And that's what we did. And we grew together. They're all best-selling authors. There's a lot of award winnings. Elizabeth Ludwig is a USA Today best-selling author. Michelle Greep is a Christie winner, and Tara Johnson is a Christie winner. And I'm so proud of them all. And we don't pull any punches with each other. And this is what you want. I trust them completely. And one thing we've learned, if one person says it and I'm not too sure, I'll let it ride. If two people say it, I don't think twice, it's gone or it's changed. And that's how we work. I think 3 is making a group of 4 is maximum. I wouldn't want a larger group. You can't give the time. We are all deadlines, and we're all creating at the same time, and we send 2 or 3 chapters a week through. That's a lot of critiquing. Fortunately, they've gotten to the point where when we're in the hurry, we've reached a level that we're not tearing it apart anymore. But I know what they're working on me with is chapter endings have to have a hook to make you turn the page to the next chapter. And occasionally I want to give my readers a rest. They need a little bit of a, so it's, those are fun things that you're always working on. But
yeah, good advice.
Yeah.
Good advice. And I agree with you, because what goes into my mind is one of the authors that I just have an affinity anytime I can be around him to listen to him, is the story of Terry Kay. To realize that Terry Kay had his critique group, who happened to have concluded Pat Conroy. Can you imagine the critique group that would represent? That was that just blew my mind to think about that. But and I think about Terry Kay now because he's having he's getting older and he's had to slow down with some medical stuff. So, but yeah, critique groups are so important to helping one another. And I just experience. I like to write alone a lot and then give my stuff out. But I started finding some support in the critique group through this Canton, Georgia outfit. Matter of fact, Antonia got to see the first chapter of my new book, and I appreciated hearing and getting feedback that early in the process. But I'm of the opinion. Yeah, I'm like you. I'm of the opinion if you get two people to say something that's common, my skin ain't that thick.
That's right.
I'll let it. I'll make the change. I won't even think about it.
We do all of ours online. Elizabeth is in Texas. Michelle is in Minnesota, and Tara is in, I can't remember if she's in Arkansas or Arizona, somewhere. I think it's Arkansas. Anyway, we're all over the place. We are not together. And it's really joyful if we happen to go to a conference together, then we room together and see each other for once. But I like doing it online. You can go faster. It's okay when you're starting out writing to do an in-person group, but it's slow, very slow. And
I agree with that. Yeah. Has anybody else, Martha, what about you? Did you do any critique partner work or not?
No, I was writing at 4:30 in the morning. And so nobody
you couldn't find a critique partner that early.
The other problem I have is surgical training. We are trained to be brutally honest. I mean, we're almost kind of mean-spirited to each other because if you make a bad decision, somebody's life is at risk. And so when I have had people ask me to look at things, I don't think they really appreciated my attitude because I took the same diligence with looking at their work that I would take, if somebody was asking me, what do you think about this? So I don't know that my personality is fitted for working in groups like that. I'm going to have to change, or I don't know, but no, I have no experience with that. The few people who've asked me to look at things, I think they ended up with their feelings hurt. And I don't know, but I think I would love to do that. I just don't know if I'm suited for it or not.
I can understand that. Absolutely, Martha. It would be, there is a fine line in critiquing. You want to, especially the level, I mean, when years ago, we would point out lots of nice things. We don't bother anymore. We don't have time anymore. They send it, I go through it and make a couple of suggestions here and there. And sometimes it'll be, okay, I just don't buy this. But I can say that because we know each other so well. So I can see exactly what you're talking about. And I wouldn't want it. I would hate to see a young writer on the receiving end of one of yours. Yeah, for now. And even one of mine. Because like I say, the four of us are so close that we know each other and we hear the tone. And I mean, they critique in my voice and I critique in their voices. They've never changed the voice of my book. And that is something that's vitally important, that a critique partner doesn't change your voice. So.
Well, I
Anyway.
think the critique, and Martha, for you too, for sure, finding the right critique partners is like, you know, finding who you're going to hang with in an all-call room.
Yeah.
And being able to adapt one another.
I don't really want to be patted on the head. I don't like to waste time, so I wouldn't mind having somebody that's brutally honest with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you do it. Yeah, and I would want that too, because if you can become friends that can still understand what being brutally honest means,
Right.
because you're not doing it to be brutally honest in a negative way. You're trying to do it in a positive way.
Absolutely.
And that's the key to critiques, because I don't want somebody to pull a punch. If they're not 100% comfortable with something. Don't try to sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
Say, hon, why is this even here? You know, or, you know, why didn't you do this?
Exactly. You know? And yet there are ways of, I know an editor told a friend of mine that he'd never make a writer. I mean, absolutely devastated him. He stopped writing. And we decided a number of us in an earlier critique group, to put together a book of novellas. And it was a tiny house book. And we had pulled it off the market, and we're all now taking our own stories. But when I read his story, I got so excited. It was wonderful. The voice was fresh and new. And I'm thinking, this agent was an idiot. And we got him to write again. And I am so excited about it. Mike Garrett is his name. And his story was absolutely phenomenal in that book. One of my favorite ones in there. So I think how we state something, here's the deal. I got to didn't have a book published yet, but I was teaching at a writers conference, and I said I would do paid critiques, and I would do short stories or, you know, scripts. I got a short story and everything was wrong with it. I mean, everything was wrong with it. And I emailed Deb Rainey. I said, Deb, I'll just kill this person if I just redline everything. How do you do it? She says, I choose one or two things and go through and just concentrate on those. So I did that. But when I got to the end of her story, the end, I mean, after you've written a whole lot, you kind of can pick the ends of what's going to happen in a book. You know what I mean? It's hard to fool us anymore. Her story came so far out of left field, I was just left with my jaw on the floor. And I emailed her immediately. And I told her, all right, you got a lot to learn, but my goodness, are you a born storyteller? That's all she needed to hear. I could have redlined every word in that thing, but I validated her. And I was so excited to meet with her because she is a storyteller. She just had to learn how to do it right, you know. So I think that's how we have to approach critiques.
That's a very good point, because part of the other reason I haven't gotten into one is I feel like I don't have much to offer. I'm like, you know, I'm new, and it's the blind leading the blind.
And then you do it as a reader. How does it affect you as a reader? That's what I always tell people. If you're new at critiquing, then you're a reader. How does it affect you? Are you drawn into the scene? Are you hanging on every word? Michelle Greet writes romantic suspense, but she writes historical romantic suspense. And I do not read suspense. I'm the queen of the big honkin' chicken club. So I have to rush through her stories just the first time through so I can see what happens in the chapter. And then I go back and can critique it, put on an editor's hat. But as a reader, my gosh, the tension is so high. And that's what I tell her. You know, how, as a reader, that's what you can give. If you go into a critique relationship, you start there.
I relate to where you're coming from, because, you know, I meet all of these wonderful, there's Antonio there. I meet all these wonderful writers who have MFA behind their name or something like
Yeah.
that. And here, you know, this was just taking practical life and trying to put it on paper. But when I've gotten around people who know how to write the little intricacies, it has saved me so much time and effort and frustration when they've given me the guidance, and I've listened to them. But yeah, learn to do that as a reader. Because my editor once told me, because I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. She says, I know you don't understand, but you've read enough books, you know storytelling, you have a pace about your writing that reflects that. Just keep writing, we'll clean up the rest.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what a critique relationship should be about. You
It
can
is.
always
We've
plot.
Yeah. We've been real lucky. Our editors, and we all are in different publishing houses, but they always talk about how clean our books are when they go in. But because we're that way, and we each have different, have a different strength that we can
Right.
give to one another, you know. So, and the relationship is wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. I wouldn't want to write without my critique partners going through, but they've taught me so much too. That's what's neat. They've taught a lot.
For a nascent writer, the critique level early on should be more surface oriented, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The more in-depth critique can happen once you get through that first draft.
Yeah.
Once you've got the story pretty well written, now your critique partners can go back in and do a little more deep diving to help you shape it and manipulate. I can remember, you know, my most recent story is by the time that it got to the developmental editor, and I get I'm talking with him, and he says, okay, hey, your writing seems to be good. You had a good editor. Great. Here's what I want you to do. Tear out the first chapter and start with chapter 2.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
You know, tear my heart out. But no, then all of a sudden he explained it to me. When Pinckney told me what he was referring to and why, I said, duh, you know.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have handled that, you know, early in the process. It probably would have been I would have ignored it almost, because you're creating your baby. I'll start with you, Ann. Tell everybody where they can find your books, you know, and, you know, what are your plans going forward with any author type of activities and events?
Yeah. My books are on Amazon. They're on Target.com. They're on LPC Books and in select bookstores. Going forward, I'm going to finish up this series. I've decided I love the 1920s, 1930s, and I'm going to camp out here for a while. We'll see what happens. I never know. I don't have too terribly many stories far ahead. I just, when the fourth one gets done, I'll start looking for some more, and who knows what they'll do. I have no idea. I like. I don't know. I never know that far ahead. Author, yeah, I've got, because of On Sugar Hill coming out next year, I'm going to do a launch party there in downtown Sugar Hill. The mayor wants it. He's all excited that we've got Sugar Hill coming out in another book. So, so doing that, yeah. It's kind of fun when you include your town. Otherwise, I don't have a lot of book signings or anything lined up with COVID. It's kind of been, you know, yeah. So
yeah,
we're going back into rehearsals too. We're going back into the theater. The play that refused to die is going to be produced next February, Blythe Spirit. So we're going back into rehearsals. I'll send you information. I'll send you some tickets.
Yeah, do that. Connie and I would love to come up and spend the night up there and get to see that. So
Oh,
Miss
we would
Martha,
too.
what about you?
I'm sorry, I'm excited to play.
Yeah.
I want to know about it also. Jesse and I would love that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'd love to have you come up. I'll send you a couple tickets.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
We'll do a party night up there in Sugar Hill.
that would be
Um,
fun.
So yeah, absolutely. So tell me where are your books? I know you do a lot at Bookmiser and a couple of others up there. What do you got going on now?
I love the small bookstores.
do
So I'm
too.
always plugging Bookmiser, but it's easy to get my book on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's
Right.
both for Nook and the Kindle. The website is just my name, www.marthaboone.com.
It's in print too, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And I'm working on two things. Number one is the sequel
yeah.
to The Big Free. And the second thing I've been working on, and this just shows how crazy my process is. One day I write my fiction book. The next day I write my nonfiction book.
Oh.
And I'm writing a book which is Patience, called What I Didn't Have Time to Tell You in a 5-Minute Office Visit.
Oh.
And so I've kind of,
Wow.
yeah, for about 10 years, I've been very upset that we don't have the time to talk about things that I think would genuinely make their health better. It's been so focus oriented, and the more we're typing in the room with the patient, the less patient-doctor relationship we have. And so this goes through everything that I wish I had time to tell them. I'm about 3/4 of the way through that.
That's good.
I think that's a very good book. Yes. Excellent. Excellent, Martha. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for all of you being here. Martha, I look forward to catching up to you and Jesse soon. And I'm looking forward to those tickets.
Yes.
Everybody else, so I don't have to name everybody. There's a bunch of you here. I'm glad that you're all here. Spread the word. Tell everybody about Hometown Novel Nights, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody again.